warm welcome, dear friends and fellow human beings, to today's solar news. We are already experiencing geomagnetic unrest with relatively strong winds and a strong irradiance, which keeps dropping out in the measurements. But the high wind speeds show that the corona hole high-speed streams are currently hitting Earth and, at least for now, are causing geomagnetic unrest. To be precise, they already arrived yesterday around 8 p.m. German time, or 6 p.m. UTC, with a KP5. This was followed on the HP30 index by more half-hour phases with KP5, which continued into the night until about, 11:15 p.m. After that, it continued with KP4. So that was the first wave that came in, and it had a somewhat stronger geomagnetic disturbance index than what we're seeing now as things progress. But we're going to get very fast winds that'll put pressure on the magnetosphere. On the sun, we only have, minor events in the lower C flare range, so nothing yet that would really be relevant for Earth. And as we can see here, the sun is weakening. A single, isolated sunspot, number 4465, on the eastern side, now moving into the central region. Otherwise, nothing at all. That has also decreased again. Yesterday, that was still a beta gamma delta sunspot, but now it's been downgraded to a beta gamma sunspot. Overall, there are still 5 active regions. 33 sunspots are disappearing today. Altogether, 81 sunspots are still active. And here we can see the arrival of the coronal hole yesterday, with the increase in speed where the velocity is a little over 500 kilometers per second. Normally, it should be a bit higher. These are typical values for a coronal hole. Yesterday, we still had a lot of particle spikes, with a bit more between 10 and 30 parts per cc. So those are already stormy regions. Now it has dropped off. That means the CME, the glancing CME that arrived here, has now dissipated. And now it's all about the coronal hole high-speed streams. These are hot ions that contain only a few particles. That's why there's this drop in particle density. It separated out yesterday, so to speak. It wasn't until around 4 a.m. UTC, so 6 a.m. German time, that we saw this drop, and up until then, there were still particles from the CME that hit us as a glancing blow from the C6.7 flare event. Temperatures are also classic indicators of coronal holes. These are hot ions coming in, but here they've completely dropped off. So here, we'll probably have very fragmented coronal hole high-speed streams, which will likely make very rapid jumps again. That won't last long. Normally, during these ion storms, there are very, very hot winds that heat up the irradiance, but as we've already seen, the irradiance is currently very low. Well, now we're looking at the Van Allen belt, and we can still see massive leaks in the upper regions where the protons are supposed to be stored. And otherwise, there are precipitations coming from the ring current system, which indicates a very poor suboptimal coupling to the magnetosphere and the ionosphere. We can also see this in the bus-rust recordings, where we have our magnetosphere, and here the head is only at about 5 Earth radii, which is much too small. It also goes along with that a bit, since the Van Allen belt is there as well, meaning the head pushes a bit into the Van Allen belt. And as a result, you naturally get these leakages in the upper storage areas of the protons, which then precipitate into the atmosphere. We still have very strong interplanetary fields here, which don't show up on the monitor, a very weak dipole, and repeated energy inputs up here into the polar holes that form, often with very compressed terrestrial field lines that then close in the tail and lead to magneton explosions, which further weaken the dipole. Likewise, the drifting of the head toward the south, and yes, also the deformations at the head, as long as the field lines can close above the head, which is only possible for them in a very suboptimal way. So our magnetosphere remains very weak, And as a result, the influx of high energy particles from the solar wind is no longer deposited in the Van Allen belts, but instead enters the atmosphere. And we continue to see a very, very strongly thinned electron migration in the F2 layer, yes, especially here in the areas down toward the poles. At the equator, there's only a small region that has, yes, an intensity of 8 or 9 electrons. That's far too few. And here we have massive leaks due to, yes, failing protons in the system. On the one hand, we have static fields that build up as a result, and on the other hand, an over-acidified field. That's why today, electron-rich alkaline foods are important, so that the electrons don't leave the insides, meaning the organs, and move to the skin surface to react with the available protons. So today, you really have to put in a bit of effort to maintain your electron balance. Today, the streams are coming from the coronal CH2 hole. A new coronal hole is forming, the CH3. It's still very small, but it's at the equator. That means, even here, the winds might not reach us yet. So this is the impact window. These winds could then, well, hit us starting tomorrow, and up here in the north, a larger coronal hole is also opening up. But in this configuration, it still doesn't have any relevance for Earth. And with that, let's look at the outlook for the next 3 days. Today, a potassium phosphide 5 storm is expected. Tomorrow, the peak of the coronal hole high-speed streams is expected to arrive and generate a KP 5 to 6. There's also supposed to be a small cluster coming along from a sea flare event. We'll have to wait and see, but it looks like we'll get a G2 storm starting tomorrow, and by the 14th, the whole thing will gradually die down. That's all for today from the sun. And here, once again, is the C6.7 flare that launched the CME, which will merge with the coronal high-speed streams and reach Earth tomorrow. With that, I wish you harmonious movements. All the best, your Hendrik.